Hello and welcome to Be Amazing with Dr. Dave. Be Amazing blog offers insightful information and solutions to day-to-day issues that impact our lives. So I welcome you and I hope you enjoyed today's topic, which is on emotional sobriety. You know, being free from addiction is not just about being abstinent, but about being able to be emotionally sober. Sometimes things like life-changing events move us in these directions of healing and hope, which cause us to begin a journey or an emotional journey in the life that we're really meant to live. No longer do we live in fear of people, places, and things that only create more fear, but learn to be more at peace with our emotions and how to handle feelings that come our way every day. Emotional sobriety to me is about being resilient, and I had to develop these skills as well, and being able to be present with your emotions and not using other things like food, sex, drugs, alcohol, whatever it might be to make it through the day emotionally. Now, I'd like to talk with you and share my journey to emotional sobriety. So I usually like to start out with a joke. A drunk walks into a bar, sits down and demands a drink. "Get out," says the bartender. "I don't serve drunks here." The drunk staggers out the front door only to come back in through the side door. He sits at the bar and he bangs his fist and demands a drink. "I just told you to get out, didn't I? Now leave." The drunk gets off his stool, stumbles out the side door, and comes back inside through the back door. Once again, he sits at the bar and he orders a drink. The bartender, who's now extremely angry and mad, looks at the drunk and yells, "I told you, no drunks allowed. Now get out." The drunk looks up at the bartender and slurs, "How many bars do you work at anyway?" That's a little joke that I made at a recent conference in which I spoke about this topic. Kind of helps to know the mood. Bill Wilson writes in 1953 to a friend who suffers from depression, "I think that many oldsters who have put our AA booze cure to severe but successful tests still find they often lack what's called emotional sobriety. Perhaps they will be spearheaded for the next major development in AA, the development of much more real maturity and balance, which is to say humility in our relations with ourselves, with others, and with our higher powers." When I stopped drinking, that was great, but it was difficult for me. Alcohol became a means to cope with my emotions. I realized that I was kind of in big trouble in this area as I no longer had alcohol as a way to deal with my feelings. I drank really because I was happy. I drank because I was angry. I drank because I was sad. The list can go on and on for many of us. And great, I thought to myself, now that I'm sober, what was it I needed to do? The term emotional sobriety means something a little different for every person in sobriety. And you're probably even thinking about, what does that mean for me to be emotionally sober? I knew it as emotional regulation in the world of therapy or psychology, but I came across people who would talk about their emotional sobriety, which I like better than emotional regulation or dysregulation. And emotional sobriety for me has come to really mean my ability, or Dave's ability, to feel and cope with emotions, and in particular those attached with drug and alcohol use. See, my brain is wired to protect itself from painful emotions, and that's how most people's brains are wired. However, there is a crucial difference here. With addicts, they mask their feelings with drugs or alcohol. It's about being able to feel our feelings in emotional sobriety. What this means is that you aren't numb to them and you don't have to use any type of substance to alter them. First of all, I had to learn what I could and couldn't control. I had to learn to handle these feelings and not to let my emotions control me. I had a difficult time living in the present. I would always kind of flash back to the past, about even during childhood, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. I would constantly be looking at the mistakes that I made or that I thought I made and regrets. And it was when I realized that I couldn't continue to do this, as it was increasing my anxiety and my depression, as well as my alcohol intake. As I couldn't take anything back I did or said, I realized that I really needed to move forward. I really needed to realize that I could learn from that past and use it to help change the future. I definitely am not perfect by any means. I find myself going back at times, but the key is that I'm able to recognize what I'm doing and not allowing that to, continue to move forward in the daily conversations with people, places, or things that I have. when I allow myself to go back, this fear begins to grip me, and I really do start to turn back to my old ways of thinking. And that has gotten me into a lot of trouble in the past related to relapses. Now, my relapses were maybe one day, they could be several days, but it wasn't really until I began to realize what was happening that I was able to move forward and get back on track. Throughout the years, I began to develop this deep sense of thinking that I was flawed and unworthy of love and of being on this earth. I had these conflicting messages that I learned growing up, such as don't upset anyone, and I'm sure everybody can relate to that. Um, but say what's on your mind. So how do you not upset anyone by saying what's on your mind? I had to learn that skill. Even though I taught that skill, I had to learn that myself. I didn't like to make people uncomfortable, which was another message that I received. But be honest about what you're feeling and thinking. Don't get too emotional or detached either, too sensitive, and don't let this craziness kind of bubble up. Always be in control. Now, it's interesting when you look at the research on men and women. When a woman is more assertive in what she thinks and what she feels, sometimes she can be referred to as a bitch. When a man does it, it sometimes can be okay, but it can also be that they are being an asshole, and I apologize for the language. Now, what I've seen in my practice over the years is I will get men into my practice who kind of fit that criteria, but it's really not that they're that type of individual. It could also be related to depression. And typically what you'll see in children is you'll see what's called an agitated depression, which I began to see 25 years ago as I developed my abilities to be a therapist, that men also could have these characteristics. And I'm not saying women don't have that. Typically, women will show more signs of the typical depression, being sad and withdrawn. Men can also have those as well. So that's just something I wanted to note. One of the things that I felt that I didn't belong or that I had nothing to offer. So alcohol, once I found this, really allowed me to feel loved and feel like I belonged. And all inside, I was dying both physically and mentally. I remember as a child that one of the ways that I was able to gain attention was through academics or sports. Now, as a child, and even into adulthood, I was living in fear that I would let others down, and most importantly, myself. I learned one of the things that I really needed to learn was to recognize shame and practice what I call awareness, and asking myself, why am I feeling this way? What are the messages that I'm receiving from others? Are they accurate in terms of my interpretation? Because many times they were not. I needed to be able to own my own story and share with other people. And this is what the various organizations that I belong to, and in particular AA, has helped me to do. It has allowed me to share my story. I remember the first time I walked into AA and I thought about my story, and I was thinking about what I would say and really not listening to the message of the other people. Well, when it finally came time to me, I thought, I'm going to have to make things up because my story is nowhere near any of these people. However, eventually my story began to look like these individuals, and fortunately, I have a different story now, and unfortunately, many people do not. They will die of this disease or others. So I had to realize the next thing is how to make myself vulnerable. And what does it mean to make yourself vulnerable? It means the ability to share one story and to realize that we are all flawed in some way, and that we are not perfect, and having another person really kind of say, you know what, that's okay, and neither am I. And this is what this group has helped me to do. It's allowed me to say I'm not perfect, and I do need to share that in order to move forward in my life. I had to develop resiliency, which to me is the ability to bounce back after a situation occurs with our emotions or our feelings. And one of the things that I really do in working with people and changing some of their thinking, only a person, they can change their thinking, but I can give people tools and tips on how to do that. And the ability to recognize that one is starting to go into that spiral is really important. And that's the beginning of healing, because if you can't recognize what you're doing or saying or thinking or feeling, then how are you supposed to change that? So I look at patterns, and I had to look at those patterns in my own life as well. And I really had to practice learning to live in the present. And that for me meant practicing gratitude. I often have to ask myself, what am I grateful for today? And as I'm looking outside doing this podcast taping, it is snowing like crazy here in northern Wisconsin. And I'm thinking, I don't like this very much. And my mind wants to go to that negativity. In fact, even before taping this episode, I took a 2-hour nap, which is unlike me. But I began to let myself spiral down. And after this nap and waking up and having a cup of coffee and thinking about this, I began to realize, Dave, you're doing that. You're starting to spiral down. And the great thing is I have a list of tricks and tools that I could use, such as talking with somebody or calling a family member or getting online and doing some research. That to me is relaxing, or listening to music or watching a funny movie or any type of movie that's uplifting to me. Those are the tools that I use. So the first thing, again, is living in the present and practicing gratitude. Now, living in the present helps me also to embrace sobriety fully. I no longer have to continually keep track of all the things that I have to do. I'm living in today and the now. In doing so, I really allow myself to have experiences that I didn't have because I lived in fear daily, and that drove every single thing that I did. Fear is something that can paralyze people and not help people move to their greatest potential in terms of their life and whatever they may be doing. For me, I really had to get in touch with those emotions, whether they were positive or negative, and allow myself to feel them. Basically, for me, this emotional control or sobriety really came down to maintaining a really healthy emotional balance. And while I was really able to quit drinking, my inability to take control of my emotions led to relapses, as I talked about before, which is most likely to happen for most of us who do not do this. This was painful as hell. So let's talk about, where did this all begin? For me, emotional development, and for many, it begins in childhood. We look to our parents really to gain a greater sense of those self-regulating skills, or really simple ways to deal with stuff that happens. I often listened to my parents to see how they coped. I depended on them really not to only calm me down, but to show me how to do that through their behaviors, which is what all parents typically do. When they would falter or we would falter, they would bring us back to balance, and eventually we would learn the ability to do this on our own. When we learn these skills during that childhood period, they normally come natural for us as adults. If they are not learned, that's when we oftentimes will lead to such things as alcohol, sex, drugs, gambling, whatever it might be, to provide that sense of calm and a good feeling that we cannot achieve on our own. Or, as some of you might remember, that feeling that you had in childhood when you felt safe. It is not really the substances themselves or behaviors in and of themselves that cause problems. Really, it's our relationship with them and how we use or abuse them. I learned that I liked attention as a child, and I knew how to get this, and that was by achieving this perfection and really exhausting myself to the point of developing an anxiety disorder, and my thinking that I wasn't good enough, fast enough, strong enough, and that I could always do better. And most of all, the fear of failure really entered my mind. I began to realize in therapy, which is something I utilized, that I really didn't like myself as a child. I would have to say that my parents really did the best that they could do, but I know that we can always strive to do better. And I had to realize that there was a cost also in doing so. And what alcohol allowed me to do was to cope in an unhealthy way, but the way that I really thought was right, because I was gaining acceptance and I thought I was gaining great friends when I was out there doing this with them. But I realized once again that people, places, and things were not going to make me happy. I really had this longing for this top approval, perfect security. I wanted the best relationships. And this is all 18 years old that I was worried about these things. And now at my age, in my late 40s, I realized that this is really an impossible way of life to live when we are age 40 to 47 and 57 and so on. I lived in that constant state of fear before I began to really look at this emotional sobriety. I developed this dependence on people, places, and things really to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. I failed at these, and according to my perfectionistic dreams and specifications, fought for them. When that defeat came, so did my depression and my anxiety. I believe that authentic full sobriety includes body, mind, and heart. And Bill talks about in his writing to his friend, we need to grow up emotionally and spiritually. I put demands upon other people, places, and things, and all this led to was heartache, frustration, and more drinking in my life. While I quit drinking, I failed miserably because of the inability, I think, to really grow emotionally and spiritually. It wasn't until I was able to start to do this that I really think that the drinking subsided and that desire. Finally, Bill talks about in his letter, when I can cut off faulty emotional dependencies on people, places, and things, I say the advantage of having love, offering love, and expressing love appropriate to each relation of life. I was able to provide love to others regardless of the return to me. It is really the 12 steps and the work in therapy that help me to like my inner self. And by living emotionally sober, I can give more of myself, and others sure are happier in my relationships. So that's a little bit about emotional sobriety. I encourage you to look further on the web and to continue to join us at Be Amazing with Dr. Dave as we continue to dive into topics that impact people and their daily lives. And we will talk about not only insightful information, but also solutions to issues that arise in our day-to-day life. Thanks and have a great week.